Now these other stories from the Contemporary News Desk. Well, the Beatles are still a quartet. Rumors for the past few days that Paul McCartney was dead came to a head yesterday. The problem became so bad that McCartney had to release a statement showing he was alive and well. McCartney said, "If I were dead, I'd be the last to know."
Hey everybody, it's Mike, and Sallie is with us, and we're going to take a look back to October of 2022 when Sallie first presented her discovery that Billy is blind in his right eye, and he has an artificial eye. And I asked Sallie to come back and just to talk about it a little bit after about a year, and then we're going to talk a bit about Pan, and then we'll discuss Frankenstein. Frankenstein ties into the conspiracy as well. So, Sallie, welcome back.
Thank you. I hope everybody has recovered the last time I was here. I mean, that was a lot for people to take in, but I mean, once you've seen it, like we talked about, you know.
Well, we knew it was going to be a tough pill for some people to swallow because it's something that, you know, Billy's been in the picture for almost 60 years now, and nobody else picked up on it.
Well, you were close. You were really, really close with the drifting eye thing. And I think you would have caught it, to be perfectly honest with you, if you understood artificial eyes and how they work.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Going back to 2019, when I did this Stanshall presentation, I noticed the wandering eye that Billy has, and or at least I thought it was a wandering eye, an eye that drifted a little bit, and that's how I was able to tie him back to the Stanshall character. But like you said, Sallie, I just didn't have the knowledge with regard to artificial eyes to make that determination. So
it took somebody with one to know what they were looking at.
Right.
And it took me, 60 years to figure it out. I mean, I've had artificial eyes since I was like 6. That's when my eye was removed, and I was too busy making eye contact when I watched interviews with him. I was like my good eye with his good eye. It was only when I looked over the other side that I went, wait a minute, what's going on over there?
And we'll get into that because his eye, when it doesn't sync up, when his right eye doesn't sync up with his left eye, it's very subtle. And I've tried to make this point in a number of presentations and interviews, and unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand the word subtle. They're thinking that he's going to look like Marty Feldman now,
oh, God,
with his eyes all over the place, you know. And I've commented a couple of times in the comment section to try to, you know, set the expectation level where it needs to be. That it is subtle, and many times when you look at Billy, his eyes are going to move together and they're going to be in sync, and it's going to look quite normal. But there are other times when you're going to look at images or you're going to look at video and you're going to see that there is something off, you know. So, and we'll get more into that. We spoke yesterday, and you said, after I asked you the question, how confident are you a year later that Billy's right eye is artificial, that he's blind in his right eye? And you said, well, 99%. And I asked you, what's keeping you from getting to the 100% threshold? And you said, well, because I can't physically be there with him and tap on his eye. Right?
And I've actually done that. I've had talk to people and go, no, I have an artificial eye. And they go, no way. And I'd have to reach up and tap it with my fingernail. And they go, you know, with their mouth hanging open. So I can't do that with Bill. But my experience is having an artificial eye all in my life, it's pretty obvious. Yeah.
Once you showed me what to look for, I can see it.
Yeah.
Like I said, folks, you're not going to see it all the time. What I have to do sometimes is, if I'm watching a video, I have to slow it down.
Yeah.
And capture it that way. If you're going at normal speed, sometimes it's going to be very difficult to pick up because, you know, things are moving quickly.
Somebody made a video showing him in concert, and if you slow it down and you frame by frame, you can see. I mean, it's not blatant, but you can see that they're not completely in sync with each other.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that you have an artificial eye or an ocular prosthetic, and when we spoke yesterday, you said that you had your eye removed back when you were about 4 or 5 years old, and it was due to a parasite.
I got diagnosed with that right around the time they took it out when I was 6.
Okay.
Apparently what happened, and, I remember, bits and pieces of it, and my parents have kind of filled me in and stuff like that. It was a really long time ago. But I think what started this whole thing, and I told you this story yesterday, is that I was born with these really long eyelashes. I mean, crazy wild eyelashes, and people used to stop my family and talk about those eyelashes and stuff. And people would say things like, a lot of men are going to kill themselves over you, and you're going to break a lot of hearts. And it went on and went on and went on, and I got really tired of it because then my parents started calling me cow eyes.
Because of the long lashes?
Yeah, because of my long lashes. And out of anger of just constantly being given a hard time about my long eyelashes, I went into the bathroom. I can't believe I did this, but I went into the bathroom and cut my eyelashes off. And eyelashes protect from things getting in the eyes.
Yeah.
So that could have been what led to the parasite getting in my eye. But I used to take my nap out in the front yard, and this really did happen. The neighbors' pets would come and take their nap with me, and there was this one cat that used to lay across my neck. We didn't even own a cat at the time. And anyway, I think I got it from him. I guess that was around 4. Sometime after that, I started complaining to my mom that my eye hurt. And, she had 5 kids, all born within a year of each other, less than a year of each other. So I knew she had her hands full, but she would look in my eye and not see anything. Anyway, this went on for quite a while, and I developed where I started sleepwalking at night. But one day I was outside, and my mom came to check on me, and the sunlight was reflecting my left eye like an animal when the headlights hit it at night.
Yeah.
And my mom saw that and realized there's something wrong with my daughter. So they took me to 3 different physicians who all diagnosed me with a brain tumor. And there was one doctor that my mom had heard about, because I just remember days and days of her just crying her eyes out, thinking I was going to die. And she heard about this one physician, and his name was Milton Bunyak. I don't even know if he's still alive, but she took me to him. He took one look at me and said, "She does not have a brain tumor. That is a parasite." She got that from a cat, and which was really unusual, like I said, when you even have a cat. Anyway, they tried to remove the parasite in 3 different surgeries, and they couldn't do it. And the 4th one, they removed my eye. And it was a long recovery time. They had to do different things. I mean, there was rehabilitation. There was getting used to an artificial eye. There was, you had to heal from the whole thing.
Well, it's amazing that doctor knew about a parasite.
Thank God he did. And my oculist, he was very famous. He passed away a few years ago. His name was George Constance. He was there overseeing the physician as they removed the eye. He was telling them where to cut and all that kind of stuff to be able to save the socket as much as they could. Being able to fit it for an artificial eye and to be able to, for it to have as much movement as it is.
So it's an implant they put into your eye socket?
Yes, they did. They took the eye out, and then they made a slit. They put an implant in there. When you get to a certain age, say around 25, when everything stops growing and shifting and moving around and all that kind of stuff, I was supposed to have the implant that was put in there as a child taken out and a bigger one put in to allow better movement and all that kind of stuff. About 40, I went to go get my eye polished. You have to have it done about every 6 months or so. You have to have it literally polished, because any foreign object in your body will try to reject, and it will wear and tear on that eye. And for it to be able to move around as well as you want it to, if it has no polish on it, it won't move around and it'll stick. And, that could be some of the problems that you see with Bill. But anyway, you have to have a maintenance done to it. That's pretty much what I've done all my life. We talked about whether or not we've seen Bill driving a car.
Yeah, we talked about that yesterday, yeah.
Yeah, there are a certain amount of people that with only one eye cannot drive. They can't see distances, they can't judge, and I have problems still. If I park in a parking lot, most of the time I'll park away from all the cars because it's really hard for me to judge distances and widths and all that kind of stuff. There are things that happen to you when you only see on one side of your face. You can't judge like curves. I've bit my tongue so many times not being able to judge, the distance of stepping off a curve, that type of stuff.
I mentioned yesterday that the only video that I am aware of, now that doesn't mean that there aren't others, where we see Billy driving is when he's driving, I believe it's his Jeep or his Land Rover, and I believe he's on his farm, and he's talking about how he joined the Beatles as an already set up affair, which means that he joined them after the fact. That's a different discussion, right? But my point is that is the only time that I've seen him actually driving in a vehicle.
Mm-hmm. We've seen pictures of him riding the subway. We've seen him pictures being driven everywhere. His wife driving him around, but I don't recall seeing any pictures where he climbed out of a car where he was driving.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course some people will say, well, he doesn't have to drive because he's so wealthy that, he has a driver and all that stuff. And that's fair enough, but you would think that even wealthy people drive cars, right? And you would think that there would be a lot more images or a lot more video of him driving if he was actively driving a car. So anyway, I'm just putting that out there. I don't know.
Yeah, that'd be nice if people could send, if they found some stuff, that we could send it. But I was just thinking about that the other day. I went, wait a minute, I've never seen him. And some people with one eye can drive fine, and I drive fine. But again, like I said, there's places I park and things that I can't judge and all that kind of stuff. So there are people that have one eye that they simply can't drive.
Yeah.
And whether or not that's him,
we don't know.
We don't know, but I really have not seen any video of him driving.
Yeah. Now, I know you know this because you and I have had other discussions about this, but periodically comments will come in, and some people are under the impression that artificial eyes do not move. I have actually responded by putting a link to an ocular medical facility or a doctor that works with artificial eyes, and it's very clear that artificial eyes do move. Mm-hmm. There are situations, I guess, where if there's a lot of damage to the eye, where eye movement can be limited or maybe not move at all. But that's not the common situation with an artificial eye. Most of the time, the majority of the time, if somebody loses an eye and they have an artificial eye put in, that they will have movement, and that movement will correlate fairly well with the eye that has sight. So I just wanted you to comment on that, because I know that you've seen the same types of comments where some people think that artificial eyes don't move.
Well, that's the whole point of the ocularist, is that they're trying to tweak it to where it looks so much like the other one, and then it moves so much like the other one. They will, we talked about this in the first presentation about, there's an expression amongst ocularists. It's called lifting the lid. And they're trying to get that lid as lifted as much, and you can see it in Bill, and they try really hard to make it to where that your eyes are completely closed when you sleep. So they tweak that thing, and they try, and they'll go, okay, close, and whether or not your eyelid completely closes. When they first make the artificial eye, they're painstakingly paint just exactly like the other one. And then they just constantly tweak it, trying to get it to where it will move. And they will actually add, wax on the inside. They'll do things. They'll go, oh, okay. I mean, the last time I had one fitted, she would come in, she'd pop it in there, and she'd look at it, and she'd go, okay, we'll look to the right, look to the left, look up, look down, and then she would take the eye back out and make little X's and different things, and then go into her working thing, and then put places where it needs to be built up, where it needs to be lessened a little bit, and then pop it back in and see, okay, now move to the right.
So they're able to fine-tune.
Yes.
When you talk about Billy's eyelid, you're talking about the top lid protrudes out a little bit more because the eyelid is over the artificial eye.
Yeah, it's a hard plastic thing that's just sticking the lid straight up. Sometimes if you don't have polish on it, it can actually develop sharp edges on it and cut the inside of your socket. It's very painful. Sometimes they have to take it out to go get it worked on because it's doing that, and they have to have somebody drive them, and they can't drive anymore. It completely messes them up. Now, I've walked in the door of my oculist with my artificial eye in my pocket, and he just thought it was funny that I've adjusted so well that it doesn't bother me if I take it out and drive. It doesn't bother me if I do this, do that. It's just one of those things that I just happen to adjust to really well. I think I would have adjusted a whole lot worse if I'd lost my right eye as opposed to the left.
Because you're right-handed?
Because I'm right-handed. And this goes back to Bill, because he's right-handed, and he can't see on his right side. I imagine that is just, I don't even know how he lifts that right eyebrow, because I can't.
Yeah, well, he said in the book that took a lot of practice to be able to train the muscles of the right side of his face to lift the eyebrow, to give it that McCartney arch. Sallie, I wanted to ask you now, in your case, you had an implant put in, right? Which means the entire eye came out and an implant was put in. And even with your implant, you have motion.
I have great movement, yeah.
And with Billy, as I mentioned at the beginning of our discussion here, to detect his artificial eye, it takes some work. It takes some analysis because he has very good movement most of the time. So do you think that Billy has an implant, or do you think that the damage to his eye was less?
In that eye presentation that we did before, there were two categories. One was, complete eye removal with the implant, and the other one was it could be an artificial eye placed upon a real eye that's been very, very damaged. In my opinion, I could be wrong about this because I don't know the guy, but my opinion is that he's got a real eye that's in there, and it's been so damaged that they put the artificial eye over the top of it. And that would give him lots and lots of movement because the damaged eye is still attached.
Right. There's no implant.
Right. So, whoever is saying this, they're speaking out of ignorance. I know that somebody sent me a message one time that said they didn't think that Billy has an artificial eye because he couldn't see it, and then he sent me a picture of himself. And he did tell me that he was shot.
Okay, so hold on. So somebody who has an artificial eye contacted you and sent an image of themselves?
Yeah, sent a picture of themselves, and it was like, I feel bad that you lost your eye, but there's no comparison between the two of these. Bill, no doubt, whatever they did to him, it was under medical supervision, the same thing they did with me, and whatever has been done to him, they know exactly how to cover it up. And I think the whole point was having to do with Horus and Odin. And
yeah, it's crazy how this ties back to mythology. It's really very, very strange. Now, I'm gathering from what you're saying that you do not believe that Billy's loss of sight in his right eye was an accident.
No.
Okay.
They did this to him. I think this was part of that whole torture thing. I think it goes back to 3 years old. And at 3 years old, he even had a greater advantage than me. And I think this is why he doesn't wear reading glasses. Page 309, where he talks about he doesn't need a reading glass.
Yeah, let me read it. It's a whisper message. It says that William says eye yoga kept him from needing a reading glass. So singular, not plural. Mm-hmm. Because if he had two functioning eyes, he would need glasses, right?
Yep.
Now, in the book, it tells us that Billy was subjected to trauma-based programs, and his earliest recollection goes back to when he was 3 years old. And when we spoke yesterday, Sallie, I mentioned that I was watching a documentary that had nothing to do with the Beatles or Billy or any of that stuff. It had to do with mind control programs and ritual abuse. And I was watching this about a month ago or so. And it was a documentary, and it mentioned that the way these programs work and this ritual abuse works, it starts at age 3, typically. And I found that interesting because this is a completely different source, stating that the age of 3 is a key moment in time when these programs really kick in. And we have Billy, through Tom, telling us in the book that his earliest memory of being in a program goes back to the age of 3. So is it coincidence? I don't know. Perhaps that's exactly how it works.
Yeah, I think they've decided that at 3 years old is when the brain of a child has the ability to split. And so they do horrible things to these kids.
Yeah.
To make their psyche split into several different personalities.
So you don't think there's any way that he lost sight in his right eye later in life, that you believe it was when he was a kid?
Yeah. He could have been born with that, That could have been a sign that he was supposed to be meant for greatness.
But it didn't happen when he was 20 or 30 or...
No, I don't think so. But really, I don't think so because of the way that he handles it so well. And if you read about one-eyed people, it talks about when things happen to them as a child, it's a whole lot easier for them to adjust than for it to happen as an adult. And I heard some people recently talking about how they were sure that Billy poked his eye out on his own. It was like, what the heck? As long as it took me to recover from that whole situation, it would have taken him a really, really long time for him to recover from something like that as an adult.
Yeah, because there's an acclimation process, right? I think people who have 2 eyes take that for granted, but I would think that the acclimation process would be a lot more difficult and take longer if you lost an eye as an adult versus when you're a child.
Mm-hmm. And there's a really interesting little phenomenon with me is I can hear better out of my left ear than my right.
Oh, really?
Think about that.
Yeah.
No sight.
There's another point I wanted to make. You mentioned we talked about eyeglasses. In memoirs, it mentions in the current edition, I have the 2023 book, and I forgot all about this, Sally, and I really don't know how I missed it. Biological Paul used to wear glasses, and there are many images where he's wearing them. And we have to ask ourselves, when did we ever see Billy wearing glasses, except when he does his Buddy Holly impersonation? Right?
Yeah.
Right? Other than that,
talk to Vicky about Buddy Holly. She's been working on this Frankenstein stuff. She's been like, it took her a while to go, I'm not getting this. And then I explained it to her. And then she started looking into the Illuminati stuff. And she was like, oh, my God, you're right about this.
Yeah, when you first mentioned it, I was like, a Frankenstein connection? And we're going to talk about it. Now, I didn't discount it because I've learned a long time ago, don't discount anything. You just don't know. There's so much weirdness out there in this reality.
Yeah.
If you just take something, just throw it overboard immediately, you could be missing a big piece to the puzzle. So my advice is not to do that. Now, what I want to talk to you about is, since your discovery and the presentation that we did when you came on the show back last October, there have been some what I'll call proof points, some evidence that has emerged that validates your discovery. And one of them is the Pudsey photo, where Billy is posing with Pudsey the bear. Now, for those of you who didn't watch my recent presentation, Pudsey is the official logo of Children in Need. And Children in Need is the BBC's UK charity. And I'll read from the chart that I presented back a couple of months ago. Since 1980, it has raised over $1.5 billion for disadvantaged children and young people in the UK. And then I asked the question, but aside from Billy promoting Children in Need, is he giving us a hidden clue about himself? So, and you'll see this image, folks, in the presentation, because I'm going to put it into the slideshow. So we have Billy standing with Pudsey the bear, who is a mascot for Children in Need. And then I asked the question, aside from Billy promoting the charity, is he also giving us a hidden clue about himself? And Pudsey has a patch over his right eye. And you have concluded, Sallie, that Billy is blind in his right eye, and in the image, Pudsy's wearing Billy's Sgt. Pepper outfit, and behind Billy, his left shoulder, is a mushroom from Alice in Wonderland, and we know that he and John Lennon, in particular, were very fond of Carol Lewis's work.
Mm-hmm.
So when I looked at that image, I took the name Pudsey and ran it through my numerology calculator, Pythagorean numerology, and Pudsey equals 9. And we know that 9 is also the number associated with Billy when he plays his McCartney role. And as I mentioned, Pudsey has a patch over his right eye, and Billy is blind in his right eye, and Pudsey's wearing Billy's Sgt. Pepper costume. So we have to ask ourselves, what's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
Is Pudsey a representation of Billy? Is Billy telling us something about himself?
Yeah. And a really interesting side note is that Pan was always associated with bears, and he did Rupert the Bear.
Right.
And he's also associated with wolves. And if you watch any of Bill's concerts, in between songs, he's always going, ow, ow, ow.
Right.
Like a wolf.
Right. Which, by the way, I never heard Paul McCartney do.
Yeah.
Think about that, folks. Okay.
There's one thing about the glasses thing, going back to that, is that when you lose something, nature has a way of taking care of it. And if you look at a guy that's in a wheelchair, his arms are really built up, right? So nature has a way of picking up. And you lose one eye when you're a little kid, and the one that's still working winds up being superior eyesight. The eye grows really, really strong. I used to take a lot of vacations with my family, and we would always play that alphabet game where you go through the alphabet with signs and license plates and all this different stuff. And it got to the point that my brothers and sisters would say, well, we'll play if Sal doesn't play. And that was my nickname growing up. I could see the letters before they could barely make out that it was a billboard. My sight was just incredible. I could outshoot anybody I knew. I could outplay them in pool. All those different things that you normally kind of close one eye for.
Yeah.
I was really, really good at it. And you go back to Bill, he learned the eye yoga, and I think that's one of the reasons that he's, 85 years old, and he doesn't wear reading glasses. I think that's because he only has one eye.
And if we go back to Pudsey for a moment, I believe it's possible that what Billy's telling us, that as a child, he was also a child in need.
Yeah.
As a result of trauma-based programs, which we're told about in memoirs, and that perhaps the loss of his eyesight was the result of what you talked about before, some type of ritual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's horrible to think about. And the one last thing I wanted to mention, and I don't want to belabor this, but Pudsey has red feet. And when I did the presentation, I asked my audience to comment on what they think the red shoes may mean, or his red feet might mean. And a lot of people came back and talked about the Red Shoe Club and how that's tied to ritual abuse. So that was duly noted, but also, I also said in the presentation that red is also representative of fire, which is associated with the sun, and the sun goes back to Egypt, which goes back to Ra and Horus. So we also need to, I think, balance the scales here, because it may not mean ritual abuse. It could, but it also may not mean that.
Yeah, red is always associated with Mars, and Mars is a connection in all of this when you go back to Rome.
Right.
So I guess it's everybody's interpretation.
Yes, that's the thing. Everybody has their leanings, but I think in all fairness, we have to lay out a number of scenarios. Now, the other proof point that we got was Billy masterfully speaking at the Eyes of the Storm Gallery, where he was being interviewed. I think it was CBS, and the interviewer was going through the gallery with him, and they were looking at this one particular photo. And toward the end of the discussion, the person who's interviewing Billy says, well, you really have to have an eye to take that photo. And then Billy clicks his heel down on the floor and says, yes, it's my left eye.
Yeah.
And I'll play that for the audience, Sallie, so they can take a look at that clip if they hadn't seen it already. Also in that clip, Billy says, I really like the architecture. And that was a reference to Freemasonry.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the architecture on the building, and I'll put the video in the presentation, just pause it there and you'll see that the architecture are hexagons, 6-sided. But what Billy was pointing back to was Freemasonry, because we know in Freemasonry we have the Grand Architect, right? So that's what I think he was doing. I think he was pointing back to his secret society roots, if you will.
Oh, and that guy that was interviewing him said, you really have to have an eye for this. The whole thing was called the Eyes of the Storm, and normally the expression is Eye of the Storm. So he called it Eyes of the Storm, and I can't help think that he's referring back to Paul, who supposedly took the pictures, and he had 2 eyes.
Right. Good point.
This picture was when we were arriving at, I think it was the Deauville Hotel in Miami.
I think your quote in the book was, I can almost hear her scream.
Yeah, you can. The cop's got to restrain her, you know.
Well, I also love the cop in the foreground who just sort of looks puzzled by everything.
I know.
Yeah.
I like the architecture.
So do I.
Of that
I actually
hotel.
love it.
But, you know, as we were saying before, that had to be taken really quickly.
Yeah.
Just had to snap that.
Yeah. But you have to have an eye to take that.
It's my left one.
But you have to have an eye to take that. It's my left one.
But you have to have an eye to take that.
It's my left one.
But you have to have an eye to take that. It's my left one.
Another proof point is Memoirs has been updated with 1 whisper message and 2 footnotes that validate your discovery. So we talked about the whisper message on page 309, and again, let me put my readers on so I can read this. It says, William says eye yoga kept him from needing a reading glass. And as I mentioned before, singular versus eyeglasses, which would be plural, the word glass versus glasses. But then there's a very interesting footnote on page 160. Let me read that real quick. So in the footnote, Tom says, cover art for With the Beatles and Meet the Beatles used shadows to conceal the left eye of each emissary of the New Age, and the emissaries would be the Beatles. Now, celebrities represent the eye of Ra, which is the right eye or the sun, or the eye of Horus, which is the left eye or the moon, by concealing one, usually with a palm, or are sometimes compelled to publicly show one eye darkened by bruising. It changes how they are seen and how they see. With the right eye of Bill given to Horus, his left eye sees what is left. So that's masterfully speaking, which is what Billy was doing back in the gallery when the interviewer said, well, it takes an eye to take that type of picture, and Billy said, yes, it's my left eye. So that's masterfully speaking. And folks, on page 294, and again, I'm using the 2023 edition of Memoirs. So if you have an older edition, some of these footnotes may not be in there. So at the very bottom of page 294, Tom says, although Thoth restored the eye that Set destroyed, now an ocular prosthesis would suffice. So that's the second footnote, Sallie, that validates your discovery. So when you read that, what did you think to yourself?
When I spoke to Tom the first time about the eye, he wrote back and goes, well, it looks real to me. And it was like, okay, I'm not going to say anything else. I'm just going to grab some more evidence. And I went to bed that night thinking about what he said. And right before I fell asleep, I jolted awake and I went, he didn't answer the question.
Right.
He masterfully just spoke to me and I fell for it. Anyway, he basically said, it looks real to me. Well, he didn't answer the question. Of course it looks real to him. It's supposed to look real. Anyway, that's when I went looking for more stuff and then confirmed it. And then when he finally confirmed it, I was really worried about whether or not this was going to embarrass, I guess I shouldn't have, but it was like, I know what it feels like for me. I'm very sensitive about the subject. So, I was just real cautious about whether or not we were going to release this.
Well, you wanted to be respectful, right? And the way I've explained it, I've relayed the story, I think in 2 interviews. When you pressed Tom a little bit more, when I say pressed, I mean you basically presented more evidence that you believed that he did have an artificial eye. Tom, and I'm going to paraphrase here, Sallie, so just correct me where I don't get it right. But essentially what he said was, okay, fine, just be gentle with how you present this.
Yes, and then when I told him, do you know how many times people used to call me Cyclops Sally in school? And he goes, oh my God, I can't believe they did that to you. And I went, yeah, I think I can be gentle. If there's one person who can be gentle about this, it would be somebody who's experienced it. And yeah, I can. I told him, I said, I still haven't heard from you whether or not, we can release this. And he goes, hold on a minute, I want to send you something. And then he forwarded one of the notes, and it confirmed what I said, or what I believed. And I just cried. It was like, oh my God, I knew I was right about this, so I was an emotional basket case for a few days.
Well, he wasn't giving you permission in a sense, right? You wanted to be respectful of the situation. Is that right?
Yeah. And then he sent me the footnote from the memoirs that was coming out, specifically, saying his right eye was given to Horace. That was his way of saying, it's okay, I know, I trust you, I know you're going to handle this gently.
When you do this work, even though you do want to reveal information, you also have to be respectful. Because, if you turn the tables and you thought, would you want somebody to do that to you?
Exactly.
You have to think of it in those terms. At the end of the day, whether you agree or disagree or you're indifferent with the roles that they're playing, they're still people.
Mm-hmm.
It's even like when I talk about the Beatles not writing all their own music or playing on all of the recorded tracks, I don't attack the Beatles. I don't ridicule them. It's because they were put into a situation. They were put into a role.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some folks might want to argue that they took on a role of deception. I get it. I understand it. But you also want to maintain a level of objectivity when you do this work, because as soon as you start getting very subjective and you start imposing your personal opinions into the work, then it's really not objective research anymore. Then it starts to become an agenda.
Yeah.
It becomes dogma and all that stuff, So in any case, I'm going off here on a tangent.
Well, and proof is in the pudding. I handled this, we try to handle this as respectful as possible, and look at the results that we're getting. I mean, he's sending all kinds of stuff.
Right.
The Pudsey Bear is just one tiny thing he did. He, put out a picture with him, and you can include that in there with the 3 puppies.
With the puppies, yeah.
Yeah. He even posted that they adopted a new dog, and they called it Jet.
Yeah.
And in the first presentation, I had a horse named Jet that I talked about, because the fact that we handled this so respectful to him. I talked to Tom, and he goes, well, you don't give off an air of condemnation to him.
Right.
And it's a whole lot easier to go somewhere where you're welcome. So he's throwing information our way.
Yeah, I agree. If you're going to be in attack mode and you're going to be nasty, then, there's a lot of things that won't come your way as far as information goes.
Yeah. Vicki and I talked about this, is that if you're open-minded to it, the universe is constantly throwing you stuff.
Right.
Through synchronicities and stuff, just to show you that you're on the right path.
Right. And folks, the image of Billy holding the 3 puppies, the puppy on the right, on his right-hand side, on our left, has the same features as Pudsey. The puppy has a mask masking the right side of his face, so it's essentially the same image as Pudsey.
Mm-hmm.
What is he communicating? Now, some people, I'm sure, are sitting there going, oh, you guys are connecting dots that are not there. This is just coincidental. And, and you and I talked about this yesterday, Sallie. How many coincidences do you need before you realize it's not a coincidence anymore?
Well, if you study Manly P. Hall, he talks about that there's some people with alchemy. I've been studying all these guys because of the Illuminati and all that kind of stuff and everything that's led up to this. They will talk about, some people just don't have the eye to see it.
Yeah. I realize that there are segments of the population that no matter what you show them, no matter how many dots you connect, they won't see it. And they won't see it for a number of reasons. One will be because they don't want to see it.
Mm-hmm.
Other times, they literally cannot see it. They cannot discern, which is mind-boggling to me, but I have done this long enough to realize that that segment of the population is out there. They cannot connect dots.
Oh my God, they walk around with masks, and how many boosters have they taken so far?
Right.
I mean, you're going to have a whole bunch of people that are just like...
Now, Sallie, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other images you sent over. Now, there's another one, and I'm looking at it now. We have Billy. He's in a white T-shirt. He's got a notepad in his hand, and he's kind of staring off to his left, our right, and he's looking pensive. And here you can see where the right eye and the left eye are not synced up.
Yep. And why did he release that picture? That picture just came out recently. I don't know who's, in charge of his publicity and all that kind of stuff, but they're conveying a message from him.
Yeah, and what I'll do is, in the presentation when I release the interview, is I'll mask off the left and right hand side of his face like I've done before, and you'll see that his right eye is looking pretty much straight ahead, and his left eye is looking more to his left. And this is something that I have seen, Sallie, whenever he looks hard left, is what I've noticed, is when I see his right eye not tracking exactly with his left eye. That's my own personal observation. And I know you have said that you can see it a lot in concert footage.
Oh, yeah. And some of that probably is because he's moving around and he's sweating. And not only can you get air pockets between his eye and his artificial eye, but he's getting tears in there, he's getting sweat in there, so he's having to reach up periodically and adjust it. So that's the best way to see any of this stuff, is to just watch him in concert.
You can see it more often in concert footage. And the other thing, Sallie, you pointed out is that a lot of times when he's playing, he positions himself with the microphone so that his left eye can see.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, he doesn't position himself with the microphone where his right eye would be dominant. Yes?
Yeah, you can see him in music videos and everything. He's always turning his head to the left because he can see. He doesn't turn his head as much to the right, just like the footage that we saw before, where we thought it was just because he was right-handed that he was adjusting to playing left-handed. Like, nope, there's even another aspect to that, is that he can't see on the right side, so he has to turn his head that way to be able to see the fretboard.
Right. Now, I sent you another image. It was a screen capture from an interview that he did with John Lennon. I think it was at Apple back in 1968. I think it was the last interview they did. And this one caught my interest because, number one, I could see his right eyelid is protruding out. You mentioned this before, where the eyelid, the top of the eyelid sticks out a little bit more because of the artificial eye. But also in this image, I noticed a couple of things. One, it just looks like his right eye is not in alignment with his left eye. It's slightly off. But also, there's a glare at the very top of his right eye that I don't see with his left eye.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming that glare or whatever is from the cameras from the interview. So, I don't know. Do artificial eyes reflect back light like that?
They reflect back light a whole lot more than a real eye does. A real eye has the way of absorbing the light as opposed to reflecting it back. Because that's just a hard plastic, shiny thing. It's got tons of polish on it, and it reflects back.
Okay. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about with regard to the eye is the song Come Together. Now, I covered this in my presentation. He got Juju eyeball. And for the longest time, before the discovery of the eye, I had no idea what Juju eyeball meant. I would sing the song. In fact, I used to play the song when I had my band. When my sister got married, we played Come Together. And giving no thought whatsoever to Juju eyeball. So, of course, Of course, the lyric is, he got Juju eyeball, he won holy roller. That's another clue.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So let me just read this, Sally. I believe come together is a reference to his artificial eye. So we're told that Juju is an object that has been deliberately infused with magical power or the magical power itself. Juju operates on the principle of spiritual contagious contact based on physical contact. The underlying belief is that two entities, so we think in terms of Paul and Billy, that have been in close contact have similar properties even after being separated. So the separation would be Paul dying.
Mm-hmm.
It then becomes possible to manipulate one in order to reach the other. So in other words, they are linked together. Thus, in that context, a person's hair, fingernails, a piece of clothing, a shoe, a sock, or a piece of jewelry worn by them are all perfect candidates for juju because they are believed to retain the spiritual aura of their owner. And what caught my attention with this, and by the way, folks, the source to this is Britannica.com. In memoirs, we're told that when Billy met the McCartneys, and Jim McCartney specifically, there was clothing, a shoe, and a sock involved.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was interesting. So Britannica goes on to say, likewise, it is thought that spiritual similarity can be created by deliberately placing two things in physical contact. The underlying belief is that spiritual assimilation and fusion will take place with one entity absorbing the qualities of the other.
Oh, wow.
I think that that's what Juju Eyeball in the song Come Together was all about.
You know, it's really interesting because in Frankenstein, the first thing that happens is that he notices that the left eye pops open. That was the first sign that the thing was alive. And in Rime of the Ancient Mariner, he has a right eye that's sparkling and is like drawing or casting a spell on the person that he's telling the story to. Interesting connection.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And he's obviously doing spells. I mean, in memoirs, he talks about that all of this stuff, magic, is nothing other than energy transference. And if you watch him in concert, he's casting spells, in my opinion. That's what he's doing.
Yeah, if you read the book, it becomes quite clear that Billy is, he's an occultist. That's my conclusion.
He changed the words, the magician's son, to the widow's son. That's one of the expressions that they call harem abith, is the widow's son.
Well, it also goes back to Isis, who lost Osiris.
Oh, yes, was a widow.
Was a widow.
Yeah.
And I covered that also, and credit to Wendy, because Wendy brought this to my attention. Isis was known as the great magician. So if he is in the role of Horus, then Isis is his mother. And so he would be the son of the great magician. So what I'll do is I'll put the link down to that presentation in the description box below, folks, because if I get into that again, this will go for another 3 hours.
I've been studying some other stuff, and Mary, over the years, has been actually a title. It's the equivalent in the priestesses, that it's the equivalent of father.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so Mary, at the time, was just a title, and a lot of people believe that Mary, the mother of Jesus, is a reincarnation of Isis. So I told Tom, I said, man, that sounds very similar for a greeting around Christmas time. They say Merry Christmas. It sounds very, very similar to Merry Isis. And he actually put that in the whispers.
Did he?
Yep, he sure did.
I haven't gotten through all of it yet. I'm about halfway through the 2023 edition. I told you yesterday I'm reading 3 books.
Yeah, he told me, he goes, there was something that you directly pointed out to me that is included in memoirs. I'm looking forward to when you find it. You couldn't point me in the direction.
Yeah.
And I found it. I was pretty excited when I did.
Yeah, well, he talks about Mother Mary comes to me and let it be as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what he's talking about. I'm totally convinced he's talking about that Mother Mary religion.
All right, so I think that's all I have on his eye, Sally. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we touch on Pan?
No, I don't think so. I think he's definitely communicating to us. I think he's so tired of all this bullshit. I mean, most of the time you see his face, he just looks like he's just completely aggravated with everything.
Well, he looks more and more like he's really going through the motions now to me.
Yep.
And the thing is, once you know the backstory and you understand the conspiracy, it's very, very easy to see what it is he's doing and what he's saying, at least for me.
Also, going back to, just real quick, we got a lot of the original I presentation from that particular concert where he does in Mexico. Talking about that Mother Mary religion, he's singing Let It Be, and there's a split shot with Linda over his left shoulder, and she's always on his left shoulder because he can't see on his right. He wants to look over and see his wife. She's always placed there on his left. But the part in the song where he says, and this really broke my heart when I realized, he said, though they may be parted, the moment that he sings, they may be parted, watch Linda. She starts disappearing.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's that, I think it's in Lovely Lady chapter where he talks about that she was denied medical treatment for her cancer.
Yeah, in Memoirs, it talks about even though he's high up the ladder, evidently he's not high enough to be able to receive, or Linda was not able to receive, the cures for cancer. There's a hierarchy, as we know, within the pyramid, and even though I believe Billy's in the illuminated degrees, which means he has exceeded the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, evidently, even if you're in the illuminated degrees, and the book tells us there are 13 of those, it still doesn't mean that you have the golden key.
Yeah, and the gematria 13 degrees lines up with William Shepard, all 4 numbers.
So there you go, folks. That's the piece on the eye, and I covered Pan in the last presentation. I talked about how Pan, the etymology of Pan goes to panic, pandemonium, pandemic. And I talked about how in ancient Greek religion and mythology, Pan is the god of the wild, shepherds and flocks, rustic music, and impromptus, and a companion of the nymphs. And we know that Billy has the song Mother Nature's Son, which I believe is talking to the Pan mythology.
Mm-hmm. One of the lines in that song where he said, all day long I'm singing songs to everyone, he's in the woods.
Right.
Who the heck is he singing to? That's a representation of Pan singing to nymphs and dryads and all that stuff that live in the forest.
Right. And in my presentation I had mentioned that Pan has similarities to the Greek god Dionysus.
Oh, yes.
In Memoirs, it discusses the return to the cult of Dionysus, which would also be the cult of Pan.
Mm-hmm.
It's going back to paganism, folks. That's where it's going, and I've covered this many, many times. But Pan also is tied to the Pied Piper, which is a variation of the Pan story.
Mm-hmm.
I refer to the Beatles as the Pied Pipers of the Eon of Horus, and when we talk about pied clothing, we're talking about multicolored clothing. If we go to Sgt. Pepper, what are the Beatles wearing? Multicolored outfits. And we also have Peter Pan, and Peter Pan always brought me back to the Fool card in tarot.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to steal your thunder here. I'm just trying to cover a little bit of what I covered in my presentation. So what other aspects of Pan should we discuss?
Okay, there is a very significant overlap between Hermes, who is some believe to be the father of Pan, and Pan. I mean, there's so much overlap between the two. There's a real belief in some people, and I'm starting to lean towards that, is that Hermes is just simply an evolution of Pan. That they cleaned him up a little bit, and but he still has the now he has wings on his head as opposed to horns and stuff, but there's so much overlap between the two of them. And the nickname for both of them, they're both gods of nature and rustic and all that kind of stuff, is an expression that is used in both Hermes and Pan is Lord of the Pathways, and that's in that gematria that I sent you, and the 4 basic ciphers all line up with William Shepard. In fact, there's a really funny scene. I can send that over to you if you want to. It's just like 8 seconds long, where somebody's interviewing him, and she said, "What are some of your hobbies?" And he looks at her and he goes, "I like to make paths through the woods." very masterfully speaking.
He's like, I like making paths through woods.
Well, Lord of the Pathway says that he's a shepherd.
Yeah.
And he's leading flocks.
Yes.
And that is one of the characteristics of Pan. You know?
Yeah, exactly. And when he says it, then he kind of looks at her like, did you catch that reference? It's very, very funny. But it's like, if you know what he's saying, he even says it in the documentary making of Flaming Pie, which at the beginning of that, and I should send you that too, he's being interviewed, he's sitting on a couch, and he goes, that's when I was doing the McCartney thing.
Okay, send that over.
Yeah, and he looks at the camera for just a split second, then he goes right back to talking to them. And the first time I heard it, went, did he just say what I think he did? I listened to it 3 or 4 times, and yep, that's what he did.
When we first met, Linda and I, she said, I didn't know you played like heavy guitar like this, because I'd have an amp and an electric guitar at home, around about the time when I was doing McCartney. I'd be sitting around, just doing this kind of funky stuff. She said, I didn't have you figured for that. You know, she didn't know me that well personally.
I have an interview of him going back to last year where he said being knighted meant that he can herd flocks through the streets of London.
I think it was his daughter who looked it up and found that that's what he has a privilege to.
Yeah, he claimed his daughter asked him. Right, his daughter said, hey, what does being a knight allow you to do? And he's just dropping clues every which way from Sunday.
Yeah, for people who are paying attention.
Thank you very much.
Woo!
Ooh, ooh.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Mark.
Sir Paul McCartney.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Now, being a knight.
Yeah.
What does that enable you to do? Like, can you go to the British Museum and take out armor?
No, but I can drive a herd of sheep through the city of London.
That really?
Yeah.
That's a real thing.
Well, what it is, they give you the freedom. It's slightly different. They give you the freedom of the city.
Yeah.
And my daughter, Stella, said, what is it? Did you get anything? I said, I don't know. I got to think. I don't know. So she looked it up.
Yeah.
And she said, yeah, it is. I am entitled to drive a flock of sheep through the city of London.
I'm surprised Capitol didn't think of that for a publicity thing.
This time.
Hermes and Pan are so closely connected. Pan, or Hermes, did something really interesting, and I see how this ties into Os and all this kind of stuff. When he was born, he crawled out of his crib. The first thing he did when he left the cave that he was born in is that he saw a turtle, and he turned it into a lyre, L-Y-R-E. He is a liar, L-I-A-R. He's the trickster. Anyway, that evening, he steals the cattle of Apollo. He steals 50 of his cattle. And they can't figure out where he went because he walked backwards. He made the cattle walk backwards. Go back to Crowley, who wants you to write opposite hand, walk backwards. They even talk about Bill was very good about, I don't think he ever could run, but he was actually really good about walking backwards.
Yeah, that's Crowley's law of reversal.
Yeah.
Michael Jackson did the moonwalk, right?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up because Mercury retrograde figures into this as well, because we keep coming across the references to Mercury. Mercury is Hermes. If Bill was born on the date that we think he was born on the date, Mercury was in retrograde at that time. When Paul was born, June the 18th, 1942.
You believe Billy was born on September 11th of 1937.
Yep, I sure do. It just keeps coming up. I mean, the universe just keeps throwing 9/11 at me. I could be wrong, but my gosh, how many times do you have to have that confirmation before you go, all right, I'm convinced? The whole oath thing, this is ancient Greek mythology.
Yeah.
And Hermes is doing this. But while he was driving the cattle, stealing them from Apollo, there was a guy that witnessed this whole thing. His name was Beatles. And when Hermes realizes that this guy has seen it, he said, I require your silence of this. And this guy tells him, a nice little fee will keep my mouth shut. So he gives the guy the money, and he keeps driving the cattle. Then he stops, and he changes into a different outfit, and he comes back dressed completely different and asks the guy, hey, have you seen anybody with some cattle? And the guy just immediately spills his guts. And Hermes reveals who he actually is and kills the guy right there, turns him into stone. So we've got these death oaths, right? So
yeah, well, Freemasons refer to as their obligations, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, you want to go back to where did all this start? Got the feeling that that's where it all got started at. But what really started getting me looking into Pan is that I knew that Crowley was in it, but I saw that Vivian Stanshall doing the Urban Space Band, and he's dressed up like Apollo in that song. But at one point he takes the flute, whatever it is he's playing, recorder, and he sticks it up his nose like he's playing. And if you know the history of what happened between Hermes and Pan and Apollo, you would understand that skit. Because Pan, who's supposed to be the son of Hermes, and he challenged Apollo to a music contest. And King Midas was the only one that sided with Pan. So there's bad blood between Hermes, Pan, and Apollo.
Yeah, because Apollo won the contest.
Yes. And so if you look at that skit now, if he's, got the persona of Pan and he's throwing it in the face of Apollo, that's what got me really, really going, there's something to this.
Yeah, I'll include that clip in the presentation, Sally. As we're talking, I'll run it in the background. Yeah, so there's all of this, these ties back to mythology. It never seems to end,
Mm-hmm.
Anything else on Pan before we jump into Frankenstein?
Yeah, what happened in the 1600s was this real resurgence in Europe, real resurgence of this paganism religion. And by the 1700s, it had just taken off like wildfire. And Mary Shelley was born in 1797, so by the 1800s, and I was listening to a lecture a little while ago before you called, he was talking about in the 1800s is when there was a great surgence of Pan, and it lasted for 180 years. I can think, there's these numbers.
Yeah, 9, 1 plus 8.
Yeah.
And by the way, folks, Mary Shelley is the author of the novel Frankenstein.
Yep. And Percy and Mary Shelley were both devout followers of Pan. They got on this religious movement.
Well, Percy Shelley, Mary's husband, wrote the Hymn of Pan.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the hymn that Jack Parsons of Jet Propulsion Laboratory fame used to recite before any rocket launch. And Jack Parsons was a disciple of Aleister Crowley. And by the way, there's a book, Sally, that I ordered that hasn't come yet. I'm waiting for it. It's titled Aleister Crowley and the Cult of Pan.
Oh, wow.
So I'm waiting for that book to be delivered. It's delayed, but as soon as I get it, I'm going to read it, and I'll let you know how it goes. So there's a connection, clearly, of Crowley going back into the cult of Pan as well.
Yeah, at his funeral, they read, I think he wrote some poems to Pan, and they read his poem to Pan at his funeral.
Should we switch over to Frankenstein?
Sure. Okay,
so what I'm going to do for the audience, let me read a little bit here to give us a context, and then Sally will take us through Frankenstein. So Frankenstein, the title character in Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein, and again, Mary's husband is Percy. Frankenstein is the prototypical mad scientist who creates a monster by which he is eventually killed. The name Frankenstein has become popular and attached to the creature itself, who has become one of the best-known monsters in the history of motion pictures. Shelley's novel, Frankenstein, or otherwise known as Modern Prometheus, that's interesting, is a combination of Gothic horror story and science fiction. The book tells the story of Victor Frankenstein, a Swiss student of natural science who creates an artificial man from pieces of corpses and brings this creature to life. Though it initially seeks affection, the monster inspires loathing in everyone who meets it. Lonely and miserable, the monster turns upon its creator, who eventually loses his life. As I just mentioned, the novel Frankenstein is also known as the Martyr Prometheus, and I had a side note where Prometheus has been associated with Lucifer.
Mm-hmm.
And in Encyclopedia Britannica, it mentions that Frankenstein is a monster that torments its creator. So I was thinking about this. If Prometheus is associated with Lucifer, and Frankenstein is a monster that torments its creator, then are we talking about the fallen angels and Yahweh?
Yeah, he is like 8 foot tall.
The monster is.
Yeah. Creature. And they never give him a name either. Also, what you were talking about with the fire, with Prometheus, didn't Bill have an album called The Fireman?
Yes.
Yep. And as you pointed out, Frankenstein was released. The date reduces to 9/11.
Yes, so let's talk about that. So Frankenstein was released on January 1st, 1818. So if we look at the date, January 11th, January is 1, the day is 1, that's 11. 1818 is 9 and 9. 9 plus 9 is 18. 1 plus 8 equals 9. So the release date of the novel Frankenstein is encoded with 9/11.
Just amazing. And the book, the novel, starts on December 11th, and it ends essentially on 9/11 when Victor Frankenstein dies. So you're talking about from December 11th to the following September 11th. That's exactly 9 months. The entire book is either 9 or 9/11 encoded. And you've got these characters, right? You got William, who was murdered. There's Victor, who's the doctor. Elizabeth and Mary is, the writer of all this. Queen Elizabeth's middle name is Mary, and she died on the day that the Catholics celebrate the birthday of Mary, Mother of Jesus.
Okay, I didn't know any of that.
Yep, very interesting connections. And, so you've got William and Victor. On page 86 of Memoirs in the Whispers, it says that Victor was 86th. So you got this theme running all the way through, and Victor goes to the University of Ingolstadt, and he does it when he's like 17 and a half years old, so that would put him at his 18th year. Adam Weishaupt, who's the one who founded the Illuminati.
Yeah, the Bavarian Illuminati, yeah.
Yes, he was an instructor at the University of Ingolstadt for 18 years. Mary Shelley started writing the book, Frankenstein, at 17 and a half years old. In the book, the creature confronts his creator and says, "I am your Adam." And I read Frankenstein a couple of times because I kept thinking, something's in there that I'm not getting. Something's in here. There's just something nagging at me. And then I finally put it all together, is that Frankenstein is an allegory about the founding of the Illuminati. All of these people that are connected to Mary Shelley, Percy Shelley, Lord Byron, Mary Shelley's parents, her father's name is William Godwin. Her mother's name was Mary Wollstonecraft. Sounds pretty Masonic. Wollstonecraft, and then she took on her husband's last name. But those guys were all involved in the whole Illuminati situation. They were involved in the French Revolution. They were involved in the Enlightenment movement, the whole Renaissance thing that was happening. They were all key players in all of this.
So they ran within the elite circles.
Yes, absolutely. And Mary Shelley's mother died 11 days after she was born. Percy dies 9 years after he meets Mary Shelley.
Yeah, people don't think numbers mean anything. I still get comments like that, which is mind-numbing to me, but numbers are symbols, folks. It's the signs and symbols that Sallie mentioned earlier, and they communicate through numbers. Whether you want to embrace that or not is, that's up to you.
Yeah.
But I concluded a long time ago that numbers are very, very important.
One more thing. If you want to think about the Osiris thing, he was cut up into a whole bunch of pieces and then put back together and then given the spark of life and brought back to life. That's exactly what happens with Frankenstein. And this is all electrochemistry, and we can get into that in a minute.
That's a good point. Osiris was chopped up, dismembered, and put back together again.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I didn't even think about that in relation to the Frankenstein story. Some of the things I wanted to mention, I took some notes here. I sent them over to you. Frankenstein references that I see around Billy and the Beatles. So I said that some might equate Billy as Frankenstein, having been created. We have Ringo's Back Off Boogaloo song, and the 45 RPM sleeve has Frankenstein on the cover. And Boogaloo was a nickname that the other Beatles had for Billy because Billy liked that genre of music, Boogaloo music.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Thrillington. I wrote here that Billy released an album titled Thrillington where he created the alias Percy. Of course, Mary Shelley's husband's name was Percy. Percy Thrills Thrillington. Wikipedia states that Vivian Stanshall's name, and we're talking about Victor Stanshall. This is the version of Stanshall that did not play in the Bonzos. Billy played in the Bonzos, and Billy hired Victor to play the Stanshall character so that Billy's Stanshall character could run in parallel with his McCartney character. But in any case, so Wikipedia tells us that Vivian Stanshall's name was Victor Anthony Stanshall. So there's the Victor.
Mm-hmm.
Victor Stanshall. So that ties back to Victor Frankenstein. Also, keeping with the Bonzo theme, the Bonzos covered the song The Monster Mash, which is a reference back to Frankenstein, as well as singing the song Look Out, There's a Monster Coming. So those were some of the notes that I took, Sally.
Yeah, and when he released that, I believe that was 1968 that he did the Monster Mash thing. 68 is an interesting date because that's the year that George Bush Jr. graduated from Yale University. I think there was like 119 students or something. The groundbreaking for the towers was in 1968. 9/11 became the number for people to call for an emergency during 9/11. Really interesting parallels there.
That took place in 1968 as well?
Yeah, and there's even an interview with David Rockefeller, who's behind the towers and everything like that. And you look at his watch, and it says 9/11. And Bill was sitting on the tarmac when the towers were falling down.
Yeah, anytime something's 9/11 encoded, folks, it means that a major transformative event is going to take place or will take place.
And going back to the Thrillington, when Mary Shelley released her book, it was called the precursor to the existential thriller.
That's where you get the Thrills Thrillington.
Yeah, and he even mentioned that he did Thrills Thrillington before Michael Jackson did Thriller. And what's really interesting is that Michael Jackson, if he was born on 9/11, Bill, Paul McCartney, and Mary Shelley were all born during Mercury retrograde. During the time that Bill said that Paul attached to his shoulder, Mercury was in retrograde. When Michael Jackson released the Moonwalk was during Mercury retrograde. And if you know about Mercury retrograde, it looks like the planet is going the opposite of what it is. And you think about it, Bill was doing the opposite by playing left-handed, and Michael Jackson was doing that moonwalking thing, whatever that was. Mercury retrograde definitely falls into this whole thing. Just a little side note.
Well, look, part of their occultism, a big part of it is astrology,
yep,
astronomy, tarot, alchemy, ceremony, rituals,
Hermes is equated with astrology and astronomy.
Okay. So your view of the Frankenstein piece of this is it ties into the Illuminati or the creation or the emergence of the Illuminati.
Absolutely, dates and everything. In the novel, he'll put the date, but he won't put the decade. I think she purposely put that in there because it'd be way too too connected. I mean, nobody's ever spotted this before. She had to be very careful about the way that she worded this whole thing.
Well, you said that she allegedly wrote this book or started writing it when she was 17 and a half.
Mm-hmm.
I put that in the same category as William Shakespeare. I don't think that a 17-year-old wrote that book.
Well, yeah, Percy Shelley was not that. A lot of people give Percy Shelley credit for it, but he wasn't that much older than her. He was like 4 years older than her.
Is it possible it was ghostwritten and they were credited?
Could have been. This leads me to Frankenstein has many verses that are directly out of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. The Rime of the Ancient Mariner is the longest poem to date. I think it takes the Guinness Book of World Records that it's the longest poem. But it was written by a guy named Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and I wonder whether or not that has something to do with Sailor Sam, because the whole poem is about a ship. And Samuel Taylor Coleridge was very good friends with all these people that were popular during the Illuminati founding. As a matter of fact, he recited the Rime of the Ancient Mariner in the living room of William Godwin while Mary Shelley was hiding underneath the couch listening to this when she's a little bitty kid. But so many of these things, and in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, there's an ancient mariner who begins to tell the story to this guy, and he's got a right eye that is like sparkling. It looks very much similar to that picture you took. His right eye is sparkling. He's casting a spell on this guy, and he's telling the story about what happened to him. And he, killed an albatross, and it created a curse. What's really interesting is that lightning hits the ship, and the way he describes his crew, and the captain is the only one that isn't under this curse, is that they look like they're undead. They look like they, we're still alive, but they're like in suspended animation, which I thought that reminds me very, very similar to wax figures. And Madame Trudeau fits into this. Revolutionary War, when she was apprenticing, she was going downtown to the guillotine and grab heads, most interesting heads that she could find, and she'd load them up in a basket and take them back to where she was learning, and she would set those heads down and reproduce them in wax images. Isn't that interesting? This is during the Revolutionary War.
Yeah, it's a little disturbing, but yes, it's interesting.
No kidding. Very disturbing. I was reading it going, oh my God, are you kidding me? Anyway, Taylor Coleridge, he talks about how lightning hits and, these guys are under a curse and they come back to life. Well, that's based upon a mystery called The Flying Dutchman. And it was a haunted ship. Talk to any captain, and they will tell you they're quite familiar with the Flying Dutchman. They've seen some weird stuff out of the water as well. But fast forward to when Bill released Percy Thrills Thrillington. It was 1977, and the same year, Rime of the Ancient Mariner was released in a cartoon with Orson Welles reading the poem. Way too much of a connection between the two.
Well, also on the cover of Sgt. Pepper, we have the wax figures of the Beatles dressed in their old attire. And I guess we could say that they got brought back to life in the form of the Sgt. Pepper band. I don't know. I think that could be a possible correlation.
This is a really interesting angle, too. The movie The Pirates of the Caribbean in Rime of the Ancient Mariner, at one point, he's looking at his men, and they're still in this suspended animation. And he said, "Dead men tell no tales." Fast forward to Pirates of the Caribbean, and Bill plays in the movie Dead Men Tell No Tales. And he plays a character, his name's Uncle Jackie, he's Johnny Depp's uncle. But he's a pirate, but the last few sentences that he says is Johnny Depp's being carried away. He said, if they disembowel you, which is a reference to William Wallace, and Vicky brought that to my attention, he also says, ask for Victor. He's got the softest hands.
Okay. Oh, interesting. What are they saying? Ask for the guy that's going to bring you back to life?
Well, it's definitely a reference to Frankenstein and, Victor, who played Vivian Stanchel. I mean, of all the names that he could have used, he had to use that one. These are all clues. He's been throwing clues out.
Right.
It's just that we're now catching on to it. Like the eye thing, we've probably seen a whole bunch of this stuff hundreds of times, and until we figured it out.
The thing is, Sallie, it's because people don't expect something like that. So you're not looking for it. You're just not looking for it.
Well, when people start hearing about the rime of the Ancient Mariner, hopefully they're going to go out and they're going to listen to it. It's on YouTube. It's narrated by Orson Welles. I mean, you could see the connection between that and Frankenstein. And then for Bill to play in a movie that features the Flying Dutchman, and his few lines in the movie, he gives a reference to William Wallace and to Victor. I think that's worth paying attention to, considering everything else that we're learning here.
Yeah, but like I said, you have to have the wherewithal to pick up on that stuff.
Yep.
It's very deep. Every once in a while I say, I got to do something different. I've been doing this too long. And then something else rolls up on your doorstep. And then you get interested again. You're thinking, oh, well, what's that? Let me take a look. And before you know it, you're up to your eyeballs in it again.
You're down the rabbit hole again. And even the name Frankenstein. I learned this from, who's that guy we like? Robert Sepper. He talked about that the Illuminati was actually founded by 3 different people. There's a guy named Jacob Frank, Adam Weishaupt, and one of the Rothschilds. She encoded, or whoever encoded this book, they included the 2 people that helped with that name, Frankenstein. She took Frank from Jacob Frank, and then it would have been too obvious with the child, so she just put in another very famous Jewish name, which is Stein, which means stone. And, interesting timing, that's mentioned in memoirs, in the Whispers. It talks about the meaning of the name Stein, that it means stone. Sounds like a pretty Freemasonic name.
Well, it sounds like it might go back to the stonemasons.
Yep.
Just taking a guess here.
Quarrymen.
Yeah.
We even have, John dressed up like Pan.
Yes. That was a postcard that was included with the original release of the Imagine album.
Yeah.
So, and I'll put that in the presentation. I've got that. In fact, I've got copies of the Imagine album with that original postcard. All right, Sallie, I really appreciate your time, and this is going to be a great show. And I'm glad that we did a look back after 1 year.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Mike.
All right, Sallie, you have a great evening, and we'll talk soon.